So let's investigate a little bit as to what happened with Nathanael that he became so excited and all of a sudden he's convinced. The guy only a few minutes ago said, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Now he's calling Jesus the King of Israel. And he's calling him the Son of God. Imagine that. So let's investigate. Let's start off with the fig tree. What is the fig tree known for in the land of Israel? A fig tree grows to an optimum height of 10 to 15 feet. Its branches are spread wide, and what people do is they sit under the fig trees to meditate upon the scriptures. That's what they're used for. Okay, a Jew sits under the fig tree for meditation, for reflection, for prayer, for worship, to get alone with God. That's what a fig tree is meant for. So what is Nathanael doing when Christ said, I saw you under the fig tree? Perhaps he was meditating upon the scriptures. Okay? But something connected the dots for Nathanael when he said, I saw you under the fig tree. What is it? The first thing we can infer is that Nathanael is studying the scriptures, meaning the Old Testament. He's meditating upon something. What was he meditating upon? Okay? The two words I want you to follow. Christ said, indeed he's an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. Right? Two words, Israelites and deceit. Who was the deceiver in the Old Testament?
Satan.
Who was the person who was the deceiver in the Old Testament? His name means a deceiver. Who was that? Jacob. Jacob the deceiver. Okay, we got that. Okay, connected there. Jacob. So far so good. Jacob means a deceiver. Yaakov means a deceiver or a heel grabber. Heel grabber is also meaning a deceiver. Right? So how did he get this title? Because that's the name he was given and he lived up to his name. He deceived his brother Esau twice. Not only to inherit his firstborn privileges. Esau was the firstborn son. Jacob was the second guy. But one day, for a bowl of noodles, a stew, he sold his inheritance to his brother. He manipulated and tricked him and deceived him into inheriting his blessings. That's one deception. Number two strike was when he goes to his dad with some hair on his body like his brother and steals all the blessings that are meant for the firstborn. In two ways, he deceives. But he was a mama's boy. You know, that's the thing. Mama says, oh, your brother is angry. You heard the news? Your brother is angry. I have a game plan. Your uncle lives in a place called Haran, and his name is Laban. Go and stay there until your brother blows off his vent for a little while, and he cools down. Then you can come back home and everything will be all right. So Jacob, he runs away from home after deception and goes and stays with Laban, falls in love with a girl, gets deceived himself. His father-in-law is like a master brilliant deceiver himself. A deceiver meets deceiver, and a deceiver is out-deceived. Right? Imagine those combinations. So he had to work another 7 years for another girl. So 14 years he spends dating. Right? Imagine the guy's life. Right? So here is him who is deceived. But something happens. One day, years go by, Jacob is married, 2 wives, sons and everything. He decides to come back home where he left off. But one night, there's an incident that is happening on his return. He's afraid what his brother would do to him. Esau, what will he do? Will he kill me? Is he still angry with me? He's still mad. So that night, he was wrestling. He wrestles with God. Strangely, God pounces on him. I don't know why, don't ask. This is one of the most mysterious stories ever. And he wrestles with God all night. And he prevails. And God says, yeah, okay, you wrestled and, you prevail. What do you want from me? You know, this strange thing. How can you prevail against God? But Jacob wrestles. There's a transition that goes on in his life. At the end of it, the angel says, you're no longer Jacob. You'll be called Israel. Okay, see the connection there? Nathanael, behold an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. Nathanael under the fig tree, studying the scriptures. Perhaps Nathanael is studying about the life of Jacob. And all of a sudden he's reading this and somebody talks about deceit, somebody talking about Israelite. Nathanael's like, okay, wait a minute, what's going on? This man knows what I'm meditating upon under the fig tree. Tell me you don't believe me. We'll go further, okay? You'll see. Jesus answered and said, oh no, there's something else that happens. In something else that happens in Nathanael's life, in Jacob's life, which we'll talk about in a little bit, okay? Jesus answered and said, verse 50, Jesus said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. And he said to him, most assuredly I say to you, hereafter you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. So where is that heaven open and the ladder situation happen again? In Jacob's life. When he was running away from his home, one night he gets so exhausted he uses a stone to sleep. I can't imagine using a stone for a pillow, but he did. He puts his head down and then he had a dream where he sees a ladder from heaven and the angels ascending and descending upon the ladder. So Jesus Christ is saying, Nathanael, I saw you under the fig tree. I know what you are meditating upon. Jacob, the Israelite, deceiver. You got surprised with that, but let me tell you one more thing, just to make sure you get my point. You haven't seen anything yet. You will see a ladder, in the sense like you'll see the heavens open, the angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. This is in Genesis 28, the Jacob ladder story, the stairway incident. How wonderfully and intricately this Christ had these subtle undertones in a simple statement. In a simple statement. All he said is, I saw you under the fig tree, and this guy had a drastic turnaround. No wonder he had the turnaround, because he got the point. Jesus, you know me. You saw me. Right? So what did Jesus actually know? Let's see what he actually knew from this whole situation. First of all, he knew who he was. Number two, he knew where he was, sitting under the fig tree. Number three, he knew what he was doing. And number four, he also knew how he was living his life. He knew who he was. It was Nathanael who was approaching him. Jesus knew that. He knew how he was living his life without deceit. Okay? And he also saw him. Where? Under the fig tree. And number four, he also knew what he was meditating upon. He knew that he was meditating upon Jacob's life. So when we say God knows, all of a sudden you see the depth of the mystery through one statement, how far he went, how deep it went, and how it affected Nathanael, that he declared immediately that he's the Messiah, the Son of the living God. How quickly he changed. And Christ attested to his belief by saying, you will see the angels ascend and descend upon the Son of Man, saying, Nathanael, I am the ladder through whom people have the access into the presence of God, to heaven. So Nathanael is assured that indeed he is the Messiah. He's speaking about the heaven that's going to be open in the future because of him. See how much is packed in there? But I'll give you another Beautiful insight. This is not in the Bible. It's a little additional literature that I found, which is beyond fascinating. This history comes from Syrian Christianity, from Syrians, ancient history. Remember the story where Jesus wanted to wipe out the infants? Herod wanted to wipe out the infants under 3 during the time. The tradition says, that Nathanael was almost the same age of Jesus Christ, it seems. And the tradition says Nathanael was also living in that area where the infants were killed, and his mom, during the time when the babies were killed, took that baby and hid him under a fig tree. This is the Syrian traditional story about Nathanael. So he was hid under the fig tree. When Christ was saying, I saw you under the fig tree, imagine how far it is going now. It's like, Nathanael, while that incident was happening, I was the one who was watching you under the fig tree. Wow. See the depths and the connections that, you can see through this? It's unbelievable how Christ can nail a guy down with one sentence. And that is why you see the mystery of Christ's life. If you look at it superficially, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. For a guy to immediately say, oh, you're the Rabbi, the King of Israel. You can read through that and say, oh, great, probably he was convinced looking at the glow of his face. It's nothing to do with the glow. It's about the depth of the knowledge of Christ, the omniscience of God. He proved to Nathanael in one shot, Nathanael, not only I know who you are, how you're living your life, where you were, and what kind of man you are, right? And what you have meditated, what you're thinking. I know that too. And I know what happened with your childhood. Imagine, he covered so many areas in one shot, and it brought about a drastic change, right? Nathanael, if you go to him, to heaven today, and tap his shoulder and say, Nathanael, what do you think when the Bible says God is all-knowing? What would he say? Oh, come on, let me tell you. That day when I was sitting under the fig tree, and he came to meet me, he said this. And you know how fantastic it was? Because he knew every detail about my life. You know how comforting that was? That is all that was required for Nathanael to become one of the 12. How fantastic is that? Nathanael will be the lecturer for an all-knowing God in heaven. That's what I think he'll do. Special subject, all-knowing God. Nathanael will cover the subject. What happened to Nathanael after the fact? Later on, Nathanael, one of the 12, he went to the eastern side from Israel. He was establishing, as a missionary, the first apostle, disciple of Christ. He established churches in the east. And Nathanael Bartholomew was known to be a prayerful man, historically. Apparently, he used to pray 100 times a day and 100 times a night. That's what he's known for. That's what they called him. He and Philip, as expected, good buddies, did a lot of ministry in Asia Minor, which is the present-day Turkey region. And what happened, at one moment, one of the Roman proconsuls, one of the elite Roman guy, his wife becomes a Christian because of Nathanael and Philip preaching. And when she becomes a Christian, husband is upset, she orders crucifixion. So Philip gets crucified. Nathanael was about to be crucified, but something happens with the magistrate, with the law, that he was let go. So he comes down the cross and he keeps going. And believe it or not, he went eastward, further eastward to India, where I'm from. Nathanael went to India. Thomas went to India too, by the way. So from there he goes towards Armenian region, Armenia, which is around the Caspian Sea. That is where he does majority of his evangelism and his ministry. And he eventually becomes a martyr in 68 AD. Talk about being a follower. A follower can become a follower if he understands an all-knowing God. I want to follow God, but I want to know that he knows who I am. I'm not Simon. I will be Peter one day. Oh, I'll trust him with that. I'll trust him with the fact that he knows every detail of my life. I'll trust him so that I can come I can see, and I can remain. See how everything flows? See how John wrote this so systematically? Sometimes you feel the gospel is all disconnected stories, but so he weaves a thread. So I'll wrap it up. We're doing so well here with time. I gave you a chart, and then in one of the notes you'll see there's a chart. It's the comparison between Genesis and John 1. So far, any questions? Okay. Yeah, Sandra? Go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
Why does it say that Jesus, why do you say Jesus is the son of Joseph, or says that? Why do you say it's from the Old Testament?
Okay, 1 second. Why do you say, the question is, why did I say Jesus as a son of Joseph? Right? What is that significant for? Right? So as I said before, the Jewish people, when they read about some prophecies about the Messiah in the Old Testament, they look like he was a man who was betrayed, he was a suffering man, and they thought, okay, this Messiah is going to suffer for us. And they also look at some prophecies which looks like, oh, he's going to be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he'll rule and reign. They'll see all those prophecies too. And they couldn't bring these two together. How can he be suffering, but how can he also be the King of Kings? So what they decided in the end is, okay, there are two Messiahs who will come to deliver us. One will be a suffering one, just like Joseph was in the Old Testament, where he was betrayed by his brothers and he suffered. And he'll also be a king like David. So one they call the son of Joseph, the other one they call the son of David. So Philip was smart enough to identify what kind of Messiah he is. He calls him the son of the suffering Joseph. But in fact, it is the same Messiah who goes through both. Right? That's pretty much it. First time he came like a suffering servant. Second coming, he'll come like a king. Same Jesus. They're not two Messiahs, only one. Right? So, but Philip identified very, very precisely who he is. Right? That's what the beauty of this is. Make sense? Yeah, okay. Anybody else?
Ajay has a question. He's kind of backtracking through the whole last chapter, the first chapter, but he's asking, there are 4 chronological days in the first chapter. Is there a parallel to Genesis 1?
There is. That's in the chart. We're getting there, Ajay. That's from North Carolina. Okay. Anybody else? Ajay asks tough questions. So he's a computer guy, so we got to be careful. Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? We'll cover that in this little chart that is there in front. Isn't this a beautiful story? One of my favorites. Right? Okay, let's wrap up this whole chapter, John 1. The biggest thing I notice is how much he packed into one chapter. Right? It starts with, in the beginning, God, and it ends with an all-knowing God. Right? You see the whole thread? You have to see how systematically you went from one to the other. Okay, now let's go through this chart. Genesis versus John 1. And Ajay and anybody is online, this document is available on the website. You can download it. It's on page 1. Right? Okay, Genesis starts with, in the beginning God created. John 1, in the beginning was a word. And John, chapter 1, here is Ajay's answer. John uses a lot of the next day. John uses that. You read through the chapter, it says, and the next day. In Genesis, you see the same pattern. How God created everything the next day. You see the similarities, the chronology of events. Right? That's what I think Ajay was asking, the sequence of it. You know, in Genesis, the light was divided from the darkness. In John 1, the light shone through the darkness. Okay? In Genesis, there was separation. And in John 1, looks like the repair process has begun. Repairing of the world. Right? Tikkun olam, that's a word in Hebrew, means restoration of the world. Okay? In Genesis, you'll see the firmaments separated, means waters from waters. In John 1, the heavens opened, right? And the dove came. Remember during the time of baptism? So now the firmaments are, so you see that there's brokenness in Genesis. Strangely enough, you'll see separation, brokenness of light and dark, you see all this stuff. In John 1, it seems like one is going through the other in the process of restoration. Heavens open, right? In Genesis 1, land emerges from water. Okay, Adam, you know what Adam means? Adam means land. The meaning of the name Adam means land. Land emerged in Genesis 1, in Genesis. And in John, Gospel of John, people emerged from the water after baptism. The Adams are being restored, so to speak, right? In Genesis, you'll see the voice in the garden. We covered that. The voice of God was lost in the Garden of Eden. But the voice is restored in the Gospel of John in the wilderness. John, the voice in the wilderness, preparing the way for the Lord. Okay? In Genesis, you'll see God said, Adam, where are you? And by the time John 1 came around, people were saying, Messiah, where are you? Right? In Genesis, God was looking for Adam. But in John, Adam was looking for God, so to speak. You see? Okay, next. In Genesis, you'll see man has named animals. In John 1, you'll see Jesus begins to name men. Like Peter. No longer Simon, you're Peter. See, he's beginning to name. See that correlation, how beautifully John overlaid these two? Okay? In Genesis, Cain kills Abel. There's a separation again. In John 1, Andrew brings Simon, his brother. Philip brings his buddy Nathaniel. You see how the restoration has begun? One results in death, one results in bringing life to your brother. Adam and Eve covered themselves with fig leaves in Genesis. Man's covering of sin with fig leaves. In Nathaniel, man is sitting under a fig tree, but he was coming out from under a fig tree to meet Jesus. Coming out of religion to meet Jesus. I covered that. I talked about baptize. The word baptize first occurs in Genesis when the brothers of Joseph used Joseph's robe and dipped it in the blood, took it to the father and said, your brother has been killed by wild animals. The dipping of the robe in blood is the baptized, same word, toval, baptized. The robe was baptized. In the New Testament, you see the baptism of water. Right? The significance of baptism is the birth into newness, coming out of darkness into light. Right? Everything that we see in the natural is a representation of the spiritual. When a baby is born in this world, what happens first? The water breaks, the baby comes out and breathes for the first time. Right? Coming out of water, coming to life. See the process, the sequence? So they're coming from darkness into light. See how it's all overlaid? The physical reflecting the spiritual. We talked about the sandal strap. First occurs in Genesis, where Abraham says to the king of Sodom, no, even if I won't touch your sandal strap as well. And that happens. John talks about the sandal strap. I think I covered it in last lesson. In Genesis, Abraham says, God will provide the lamb. In John, John says, when he points to Christ, says, behold the lamb. In Abraham, there was hope. God will provide. In New Testament, John says, okay, the lamb is here. Right? See the connection all the way to here. Then you see how the dove, we talked about it, dove that Noah releases in Genesis 8, eventually comes and lands upon that same symbolism, the significance where the dove comes and remains upon Christ. In Genesis, sin enters. John 1, the lamb comes to take it away. Right? So, I think that's pretty much what you got, right? Okay, that's it. So what is broken in Genesis? is repaired in John 1. And you see various titles of Christ in John 1. You see the Messiah, you see Yeshua, Jesus, you'll see the Lamb of God, you'll see the light, you see life, the one who baptizes you in spirit, the all-knowing God, the one that we need to follow. See how much he accomplished by packing into one chapter. And that is John chapter 1, very briefly. Okay? Yeah, there's so much more to this. So any questions? So we got good 5 minutes to wrap it up. Or any thoughts about anything I skipped, anything, any questions you have, or anything I covered that you didn't get or didn't make sense? As I said before, John wrote this in his very old age, after the book of Revelation. Right? After encountering Christ for his magnificence, now he comes into talking about his earthly life. You know how difficult that is? It's always easier to go from lower to higher. It's easier to go, imagine as a light bulb. Since Mark is here, I got this illustration here, okay? A light bulb. When you want to wake up somebody, how do you wake them up with a light bulb? You slowly use the dim switch and slowly increase the light. That's what you do, right? Your phone, in order to wake you up, starts off with a slow ring and slowly becomes louder and louder and louder, right? You don't go with a 1,000-watt bulb to wake somebody up and then turn it down, right? But John has seen the 1,000-watt bulb. Now he needs to talk about the 10-watt bulb, about Christ in his physical body. How is that even possible? How can he restrain himself by talking about the potential of who Christ is and to limit it to his words in his earthly life? He struggles. He takes off in full speed and then he begins to back away. It's like, okay, I'm getting too philosophical, too complicated. Okay, in the beginning was the word was, okay, now I got to slow down. And there was Nathaniel and there was John the Baptist. You see how but yet he doesn't lose the magnificence of how Jesus is God. In his simplicity, he begins to explain the 1,000-watt bulb. Nathaniel, but he's all-knowing. Right? You see how he's connecting, and that's why John is such a spiritual book to comprehend, and people struggle to understand this. But once you understand this, it's no longer about miracles, it's no longer about his ordinary disciples, it's no longer a gospel book. You'll see the depths of it. All right? So any questions or we'll conclude? We good? Okay, Lucas.
Diane is asking, did Jesus intentionally seek out Philip?
Did Jesus intentionally seek out Philip? I don't think there were ever any coincidences with Jesus in his life. I don't think he ever walked, by the way, what are you doing? You want to be my follower? No, I don't think that ever happened. Right? Everything he did, if he turned his head to the right, I think it is intentional. If he turned his head to the left, it was intentional. And every time he stopped, it was intentional. So I believe, again, God, before the foundations of the world were laid, he chose you. That says a lot. He has a game plan. Right? So I don't think it was a coincidence. So Jewish people say coincidence is not a kosher word, right? There's never coincidence with God. Everything with God is deliberate, and that's what I think it is. So Father, we thank you for tonight. Thank you for helping us to delve a little more deeper. Based on what you said to Nathaniel, it gave us so much hope, Lord, and so much confidence that you know me and you know each one of us that intricately. Help us to rest in the fact that you are an all-knowing God. You know our going out and our coming in. You know when we sit and when we rise. You know before a word is on our tongue, you perceive it completely. How beautiful, O Lord, that you are that familiar with us. So if there's anyone, Father, both online or in the classroom, that is going through a hard time and doubting and having these moments where does God really know what I'm going through? Help us to have the comfort tonight to realize and recognize that you are in control, that there is no coincidences, that you have orchestrated every event of our life. Help us to learn quickly. Instead of complaining, Father, teach us how to celebrate and rejoice and live with the comfort and the assurance of who you are. We thank you so much for John chapter 1. And Father, there's so much that at the end of all this, we say how much we don't know and how much there is so much remaining for us to grasp. Oh God, give us minds that understand